MUTTB Music Podcast.
Action.
Wow.
Hey, we seem to be in different places and in different rooms and all that malarkey yet again.
For God's sake, did you bring the cheese and wine?
Ugh. Lawrence!
Oh, dear. Well, let's hope this is the one and only time that we revert to this method.
Yes, that would be good. Although I'm just looking, you seem to have bigger things happening on your screen than mine.
I do.
My vocal seems to be very puny. Puny vocal!
Yeah. Can you hear yourself all right, though?
I can hear myself, yes.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, that's the tech.
Post-production, just push my vocal up.
The production values on this podcast, as regular listeners will know, we just dive straight in and do all the blathering right in front of you.
Yeah. It's varied, I think is the word. So
varied.
Yes. So we're not even going to lie this time. We're basically doing two podcasts in one evening today. One's the Christmas podcast, which is coming obviously
soon,
shortly. Given it's Christmas on Saturday, it'd be a good idea. So yes, they will be going out roughly the same time.
Nice.
Spoiler alert: the Christmas podcast doesn't have any Christmas albums.
It's like the bumper edition of the Radio Times for everyone over the age of 40.
Indeed, yes. However, on this normal podcast that should have been done a few weeks ago, but we were too busy, unfortunately, which is really annoying now because obviously we're now stuck doing it virtually again. We have Adele 30. We have Damon Albarn, The Nearer the Fountain, More Pure the Stream Flows. Abba, Voyage, or is it Voyager? Voyager, isn't it?
I'm going with Voyage.
Voyage, whatever. Megan Thee Stallion, Something for the Hooties. Self-Esteem, Prioritise, Pleasure. And Limp Bizkit Still Sucks.
I'm not sure it's called that.
Isn't it?
Nah.
That's what it was called.
Oh, what's it called? I've got Limp Bizkit All Sucks.
Well, you know, same difference. I may be jumping ahead with my review of the album here. Who knows? Let's wait and see. But we start off with Adele. Is this fourth?
Fourth, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the follow-up to, there we go, 19, 21.
And 25?
I want to say 25, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so, Pete. Adele.
Thanks for that. Do you know, there are some massively huge artists. Well, actually, there's not many. There are one or two massively huge artists I've never actually got around to listening to.
Mm-hmm.
Adele is one of them. On that bombshell. You've been listening to the podcast. Good night. So for me, this was ever so much anticipated because I realised it was the first time I was actually going to have to sit down and listen to one of her records in full, which, I was like, okay, let's take it on. Let's see what we think. So this is the first ever album of Adele's I've listened to from front to cover. From front to back. Yeah. And I can't quite believe I've missed her all this time. There was, of course, that Bond song, which I'm very familiar with. That's the one. And a crumble. And then regular listeners will know as a Bond fan, very familiar with that one. But as for everything else, yeah, the odd single here and there, but nothing really. So thoughts. It's a solid album. I mean that in a good way. If long entry. It's very hard to sort of come at Adele fresh. She is very much the ground zero of the sort of modern, singer-songwriter. Yes, I know she has her own Bernie Taupin equivalent. But you know, and that very much comes across, especially in the sort of opening tracks. And Easy on Me, I think, was the single, wasn't it? Was it not?
Easy on Me was the single, yes.
But for me, I mean, overall, it's a very middle of the road, inoffensive album, even if lyrically it's quite heartbreaking in points. You know, it's such a lonely album at times as well. And you know, and I know, obviously, I know the context, as I'm sure many of our listeners do, it is the soundtrack to her recent divorce. There's actually quite a lot, though, that between the loneliness and the heartache is quite heartwarming as well. There is lots of love on the album, particularly directed towards her son, less so, curiously, towards herself. And actually, I guess what strikes us out from other divorce albums we may have listened to this year, I'm looking at you, Casey, a lack of bitterness, really, which makes it unusual. So I think that's where the warmth comes from. There isn't that sort of angry, God damn it, directed at an ex or a former husband. It's very much, the loathing is directed at herself, which is intriguing. And as I say, it sort of leaves a chasm in the middle of the sort of the songwriting, which is, you know, I think that's what makes it interesting, why I've gone back a couple of times to listen to it. But I must say, it's not for me. I do find it a bit stodgy. Although, you know, musically, it sounds at its best when it's upbeat.
Okay.
And that was my introduction to Adele.
Well, I've heard more Adele than that. Although even up to this point, I've always had a mild indifference, I suppose, to Adele.
Yeah.
And I don't think this album has changed my view on that particularly. When she's doing classic Adele, such as on Easy on Me, which is a song I actually quite like, actually. It kind of worked. But that, for me, was kind of the highlight on what I thought was pretty dull and lackluster record for me. Outside of, as you say, the emotional impact of the kind of lyrics and what the album is trying to say on that level. Although I did really like Love is a Game, which actually closes the album. It's pretty good. But what fell between those two moments for me almost had me pining for Drake. Although at least Adele doesn't ramble on for several hours like Drake does. So it was all right. I mean, I found the use of recorded snippets from her life, you know, a son and a self on My Little Love, for example, which is very visceral. Similarly on I Drink Wine.
I like that one.
Yeah. You know, both kind of uncomfortable.
Yes. Edgy.
Yeah, edgy, but they're uncomfortable in a way that you know, why would I want to listen to it? Kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. It felt too close.
Yeah. On some of the tracks, stuff like "Oh My God" sounded like a Rag and Bone Man song, which is not necessarily a bad thing because Rag and Bone Man is all right.
He's all right.
I did like when she kind of went more kind of 70s soul vibe. So actually, the music on My Little Love before it kind of goes off into the emotional breakdown thing and cry your heart out.
Yeah,
perfectly fine. Really hated the opening song, "Stranger by Nature," which is her trying to do a torch singer type thing. I just thought was dreadful. So yeah, I mean, for me, it was just, it lacked anything that really hooked me into the thing as a whole. And I felt that when I'd listened to previous Adele albums, they did a slightly better job of doing that. Although, to her credit, this one at least tries to branch out musically. So since we regularly say try to criticize people for doing that,
Don't do that.
I'm not going to criticise her for doing that because good on her. She's decided to try and broaden her sonic sphere, as it were. It just doesn't really kind of work for me.
Don't want you to do.
Clearly, it's working for fuck tons of other people.
Oh yes, yeah. I mean, yeah.
So a bit like with Drake, I don't think me dissing her album is really going to upset her that much.
No, it's not going to make a dent, mate.
No. Yes, it's like you've stopped one sale. But that one sale could be important.
It could. I doubt it. I think it's
So moving on to Damon Albarn, with the nearer the fountain, more pure the stream flows. I listened to this first time just after listening to the Adele album, and I have to confess, the start of my revision, if you like, for this podcast was me going quite a lot, because I was just thinking, oh fuck me, what have I picked to review? Jesus, all this like grim, depressing shit. It's just like, and if I was being harsh, certainly on my first couple of listens to this album, I would have said it was a great cure for insomnia. But that is harsh, and belies some of the quality that actually is in the record. It's a very laid back, meandering type record, mostly pop song chorus free, I would say. A couple of bits that clearly are, but mostly not. Huge slabs of avant-garde jazzy Bowie thrown in, I thought.
I don't know.
Yeah, which is why after a couple of listens, I was thinking, why doesn't this work better for me than it seems to be doing? Which is not to say that it doesn't work. In fact, I think probably about a third of the album's really good. So I really like Raw Morning Blue, Combustion. Is it Giraffe Trumpet at Sea? All really excellent. And it's a nice record. Again, if you give it space and time, and you do need to kind of like it. Again, it's not. We've had this with a few albums, particularly this year, I suppose, where it's not really a record that works if you're kind of listening to it while you're going for a run or traveling to work or doing other things. Because it gets lost in everything else that's around. But if you listen to it peace and quiet and just chill, it's good, but it's not good enough for me. But again, similarly, what I do admire about Damon is that he does go off in different directions and does try and do different things musically. And obviously, this is his avant-garde Bowie album. And there's enough here that's good to warrant saying yay. It's just at the end of the day, I suppose I ended up being from being thinking it's cure for insomnia. I ended up being disappointed that it wasn't overall better than bits of it are.
Yeah,
if that makes sense.
This is definitely. It makes complete sense. And this is definitely the Damon Albarn that writes the Chinese operas, rather than the one that fashions, indie hits or even Gorillaz music. This is definitely the experimental Albarn. I think what ruined this album for me was that over the course of the last 6 months, well, it feels like 6 months, probably only 3 or 4, each of the songs, and there was only about 4 of them, have been released as a single on your regular streaming service.
Yeah.
Which kind of gave me a higher anticipation. I thought, oh, actually these, because individually I thought, oh, actually these are different, but I can see what he's going for here, and I look forward to the album. And then of course the album lands, and you get each of the songs, and in between each of the songs you have the subsequent selection of noodlings and instrumentals all looped together.
I quite like some of the noodlings though.
I do like the now the first half in particular, and I put here in my own notes, I mentioned, is definitely Jazz Bowie of Black Star period, very much where he left off.
Yes.
And the Cormorant in particular, I think, is where that starts.
Yeah.
Going through to the Tower of Montevideo, which I think is the middle song, if you will. That section in particular, very Bowie. I also liked, of the main tracks, I also like Polaris, this sort of electronica one.
Yeah.
But it's a shame, really, because I was kind of hoping for more, given the taster of what's been previously released. But actually, it's a bit like when they put the trailer out for the movie and put all the best scenes in it.
Yeah.
And you always sort of think, oh. So yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, big spoiler alert. But interesting, again, interesting piece from him. He continues to do interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. Which is better than not doing interesting stuff.
Exactly. For sure.
So, moving swiftly on from there to the comeback album. A mere 40 years have passed, and Abba have arrived. Aha.
Very good.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, yeah. I'm tempted to say, it's kind of it's just saying, 40 years, they've got a new album out. That kind of reviews itself in some ways, regardless of what your opinion of the album's going to be. But
yeah,
Pete, what do you think of the actual album?
Do you know, it's a curious one, this one, because had ABBA, as they haven't for the last 40 years, never released another album, you'd have probably always thought, well, it's a shame, really. They could never at least just get one more out before the inevitable happens. So, of course, this album is welcome. It's an interesting sort of coming together again, and it's entertaining enough. It certainly leans more into some of their folksier stuff, and they all began, of course, as artists in the sort of more folky scene anyway, and that comes through. So in many ways, it's right back to their beginnings, but it also, at the same time, does pick up where they left off. This album could have been released in 1983 or 1985 or 1993, and it would have sounded like a classic ABBA album. And there's some classic riffs on there. I mean, if you listen to, it's "Don't Shut Me Down," and there are literal echoes of classics as well. I think
there's an eye on Dan.
Yeah, there is the piano riff at the end of that from the opening to SOS.
Yes.
Do 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 do.
Yeah, it runs through the track. That.
Yeah, and Bumblebee, which I think follows, it's the Andante intro.
Yeah.
And they're literally ripping off themselves. That's fine; they can do that.
All good bands do, surely.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, but here it just feels more so. So away from the sort of the sort of quieter opening, and of course, Little Things. It's subtly Christmassy, but not overtly. And again, a bit folksy. I would say overall, it's a nice full stop to have to what has been an incredible career. Probably not essential, but probably gives them the sign off that they never properly had. And I think they know it as well. And the final track as well, with the huge bombastic orchestral ending,
Yeah.
very much feels like a grand finale as well. So I mean, good on them, really. I've got nothing, bitter to say. It's sweet.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is right. Really, it is. I know several reviews of the album. So I'm trying to avoid reviewing myself here.
Yeah, true.
Reviews of the album have been on the harsher side, which I do think is slightly unfair. Although there are some absolute stinkers on the record, it has to be said, in my opinion. Both lyrically and just generally said, look, I can be that woman, for example.
Yeah.
Which is a classic Abba. I wish I could be a better woman, as written by two men.
As written by two men, yes. That's so dates. Yes, it does date.
Yes, there are a few lyrics on the album where you're just thinking, please tell me this is one of the runs that was written still back in the 80s or late 70s that you've revived, not one that you wrote last week. Otherwise, we need to have a talk.
Yeah.
And also that song, I'm with the dog on that one. It's like, well, going, sorry, what the fuck's going on here? It's like, the song's about a dog. No, it's not about dog. Oh, no, but it's just talking about you singing to it. No, you're not singing to what? Christmas song again. I was thinking, I was tipping my hat, going, cynical fuckers, like it, yeah. releasing the album, plan to release the album at the end of November. Stick a Christmas song on it. Ka-ching. But what I think is most important to say is that when I think people forget because of the back catalogue is, and particularly if you're an older person like myself, who remembers the original albums, they weren't all killer.
No, indeed.
There was lots of filler on those original albums. Yes, all the songs have been going, yeah, brilliant, 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 absolutely. But there was some shit on there too. So them coming back with an album that's mixed, to say the least.
Yeah. Why
wouldn't it be? But my personal favourite track on the album is one of the two that was released early. You mentioned one of them already. Don't Shut Me Down, which is good. But I think I Still Have Faith in You is the one that will stand the test of time. The best for me, and is the one that's most likely to be on a best of repackage. If you were
that would be on the Abba Gold of the future. Yeah.
And the rest, a hodgepodge of perfectly fine and, reminders of what once was and what was taken away so cruelly back in the start of the 80s. But yeah, it's a perfectly, as I say, a perfectly fine sign-off record, which has also shifted a ton of records. So again, it doesn't matter what I say. As is so often true in much in my life.
Indeed.
Moving swiftly on to something I think totally different. Megan Thee Stallion, Something for the Hooties. This is a interesting record on many, many levels. For those who don't know who Megan is, you may have heard her on Cardi B's WAP.
Oh, yeah.
So to speak. And she's also been one of the biggest female rap artists probably in the last 5 or 6 years, but made her name from freestyling. And this album is this album stroke mixtape, whatever they want to call it, is a kind of revisiting of that kind of freestyling style. And it's a lot of fun, really. Is it brilliant musically? No. Is it doing anything wildly different? Probably no either. But still, I have to confess, whilst I was sitting there listening to songs like Eat It and Kitty Cat, I was sat there with a huge smile on my face going, this is immensely entertaining. Eat It is exactly what you might expect a song to be from somebody who also was on Cardi B's Wet Ass Pussy. And Kitty Cat is a similar vein. Thought Shit also, which has been nominated for 2022 Grammy performance as in Best Rap Track. It's pretty good. And also, bizarrely, in the middle of all this stuff about bitches, hoes, and sex, there's a random kind of single almost in there, which is Pipe Up, which suddenly kind of like crops up and you're thinking, this feels weirdly out of place on this record.
Yeah.
I mean, not in a bad way. It's a decent track. You're thinking, this sounds like this was shoehorned in here. But yeah, it's, you know, I doubt I'll be playing it over Christmas for many reasons. Although it would be quite funny to see the reaction it would get if I never seen. Okay, we've done Michael Bublé. Shall we now do some Megan?
Oh. Sure, go down a treat.
Yeah, but yes, I said I would be lying if I didn't. If particularly, you know, this was the third record I listened to as well. So I'd listened to Adele, I'd listened to Damon. This was like manna from heaven, frankly. When I listened to this the first time around, it's like at last somebody's having some fun.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yes. Yeah, that's a very fair comment. This is a really good, entertaining album. And yeah, it's just someone having fun in a podcast where there's a lot of seriousness and earnestness. You know, we have something for the hotties, and you know it picks on, you know, between all the things you've mentioned, you know, the sort of living life but living it to the full. And tuned in freestyle, which I think is one of the earlier tracks, or sets the stall out very clearly. But seriously, it's a surprisingly good album. Again, if a little long, if a little repetitive, but that's a minor quibble in this case.
Yes, it does. It does.
Yeah,
right. It does get repetitive.
It really is, because I found this really entertaining.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun record.
Yeah.
So, means we've only got 2 records left in this podcast. We now move, to pop, I guess, with the second album from Self-Esteem, otherwise known as Rebecca Lucy Taylor, Prioritise Pleasure. Does it prioritise pleasure, Peter?
You know, after a few listens, I really got into this album. It's a real... It's back to this phrase, mature pop or pop. You know, it's really strong in there, and reflective lyrics. Again, you know, sexual politics, post Me Too feminism, self-guiding. It felt like very much a team talk in the mirror at points, and the track 3, 4, 5 directly does that.
Yeah.
So a lot of discussion about mental health. I mean, you wouldn't be surprised really from an artist who calls herself Self-Esteem. But I thought, you know, on repeated listening, that the first third or so of this album, probably some of the strongest stuff we've listened to on this podcast, but there were highlights throughout. And I particularly liked the opening track. I think it's fucking Wizardry.
Yeah.
And Hobbies too, but also You Forever, which is later on in the album. But yeah, and then of course there's the track I Do This All the Time as well.
Yes.
Which really does do the sort of self-reflection stuff and deals with, oh God, a whole host of things. in conversation with yourself.
Spoken word. And if people like
Yeah.
spoken word, I suggest they listen to our Christmas podcast.
Exactly. It's a brilliant spoken word record. That sort of advisory list sort of tactic that's been employed effectively and has done so again very, very well here. I really enjoyed this record. This is one I did return to a few times. What did you think?
I did return to it a few times as well, but obviously a few times several weeks ago, which is why today I was running around kind of going, what's that song that I really liked? I found this what I liked about this from the off. Actually, the first time I played it was that it was. I think you've said best as well. Well, I think the first third half of this album is really, really good. Second half, it's fine, but is kind of less inventive and less impactful. Because the start of it is just so inventive, so engaging. I mean, from the off, it kicks off kind of a little bit Lily Allen-ish, but like kind of Lily Allen turned up to 11 with barking like a dog added to make that point. And then you've got suddenly becomes kind of a Hounds of Love era Kate Bush on Hobbies, and then got the title track, which has got some kind of like grindy guitars going on in it as well, and and then I do this all the time, as you say, do the spoken word fun, and there's a brilliant line in it along the lines of, when am I going to tell you that the best night of your life was the worst night of mine, kind of thing, which I think is just genius. And what makes that, particularly the first half of the album, so impactful for me was just the vocal and backing vocal arrangements and production on it was just really brilliant. And it combines well with kind of like, the music, inventive lyrics. And yeah, it was just, I was listening to it going, this is great, this is really good. And then the album goes on, it's the second half of the album, and once the second half of the album is fine and it has a couple of good songs on it, it's not quite up there with how good the first half of the album is.
Yeah, that's fair.
So you end up kind of being slightly disappointed at the end, kind of going, this was, certainly when I was listening to the first couple of times, on the basis of the first half of the album, it was definitely this could be a contender. Definitely it could be a contender. And then the second half, no, sorry, it's not quite going to be a contender.
Yeah, just loses there.
But certainly, based on this record, I would say certainly an artist to watch.
Agree. I agree. This is definitely a contender for the lists. Yeah.
Speaking of contenders, and apparently you're right. It's just hang on. I'm just checking the thing. It is called Still Sucks.
Oh, it still sucks.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Forgive me.
Yeah. So for those people who might be new to the podcast or newish, this is the second time we've reviewed Limp Bizkit. Last time we reviewed them, we liked their album so much we named an award after them. The Gold Cobra Award for Worst Album of the Year. So they have made one album, I believe, in between Gold Cobra and this current one.
Yeah.
But they are back. And as I said, the album, of course, still sucks. And some of the titles of the tracks on the album, I was thinking, good to see they've still got a sense of humour. Yeah, good. This could be all right. And, it's... Oh, God. It's Limp Bizkit. It's just... There's moments on this album where I was just almost crying, just partly with laughter. It's... They are their own parody band.
Yeah.
And when the thing is, when you set up a record to be called like Still Sucks, you are pretty much setting up him to go, yeah, and yeah. No. Let me put out some things there. Okay, there are a couple of interesting moments on this one. Dad Vibes, which is the third track on the album, is so bad it's almost good. And I'm tempted to give them the benefit of the doubt and say, it's fine. They then throw in a quite bizarre. I didn't recognise it at first, and then later did In Excess cover on Don't Change.
Nice.
I don't think In Excess would ever really have imagined it being covered in that manner, but that's fine. Love the Hate is particularly funny when Fred is pretending to be two different people slagging off Limp Bizkit. But then going, no, but the joke's on you, because we don't care. It's just people like you that care when people slag off you. Yeah. Sorry, not buying it. Not buying it at all. Sorry, no. And then after that, they have a song called Barnacle, which starts off really good, and then it just ends up becoming kind of subpar Stone Temple Pilots. It's rubbish. I'm sorry. It's just they haven't got any better since Gone Cobra. I played Rolling again earlier on to remind me of how much fun they were for a couple of songs back in the day, but that's it.
Yeah,
this is rubbish.
Yes, I went into this with very low expectations. So it may surprise you that I've actually come out of this pleasantly surprised.
Oh.
Because whilst I agree with much of what you've already said, I thought the humour was, with the exception of, I think, Love the Hate, I thought was more perfectly balanced. And that in itself was entertaining, though clearly it goes wrong in other places. And it was Dad Vibes in particular that I found quite funny.
Yeah, Dad Vibes is okay.
Dad Vibes was funny. But, in other areas, I did like Turn It Up, Bitch, which answers their critics. And that would have been fine on its own, but they seem to then do that every other track.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, and the joke's on you. Joke's on you. No, not really. Although it sounds like, if they're going to poke fun at middle-aged men on podcasts, Love to Hate actually sounds like we've been moderately kind.
It does actually, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
At least we've eulogized them by naming an award after them.
Indeed.
I mean, I was tempted at one point to kind of go, shall I re-listen to Gone Cobra to see if it's worse? And I went, nope, not going there.
No, don't.
We'll just keep the purity of the Cobra.
Exactly. So I would say not as bad as Gold Cobra.
Well, let's go with your view.
Yeah.
There's a sticker for the album. Not as bad as Gold Cobra.
Not as bad as Gold Cobra. Perfect. Well, the joke's on me, of course.
Well, yeah. So this actually usually, and this is a bit like listening to Commode and Mayo. Usually at this point in podcast, I am kind of like pretty much 99% certain what you're going to say your album of the podcast is. But I'll admit, I'm not on this particular one.
All right. What's yours?
I would have to say it is overall, just because the first half of it's so good, Self-Esteem.
Yeah.
Prioritise pleasure.
I would agree with you. That would be my album of the podcast as well. And I like to think in a podcast where, and I think we had such a great listeners. We had such a great podcast the last time round. But I like to think that album would have stood up quite well there as well.
Yeah, I think so.
Because otherwise, yes, there isn't much fun going around on this slightly delayed November podcast.
No, yes. I remember November. So, because we've got another podcast to do, we should probably leave it there.
Let's leave it there. Well, thanks once again.